Welcome to another episode of M&A Plus, The Art After the Deal. This episode is called From Negotiation to Integration, M&A Insights with David. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting David Edgar, a longtime M&A lawyer from the global law firm K&L Gates. With over 20 plus years of experience in the field, David brings a wealth of knowledge, especially in tech deals and global transactions. He's here to share insights on successful deal making and the importance of due diligence and integration and the intricacies of M&A strategy. So let's dive right in and learn from one of the industry's best. Thanks, David, for joining us.
Hey, Lisa, it's great to join you. I've enjoyed watching your delving into podcasts. They've been great, so I'm excited to be on with you.
Great. So first of all, I love how you love your work. That totally comes through on everything that I see you post and any conversation that I've had, and your passion definitely comes through. So I would love to hear how and when did you find this passion?
Oh man. Well, you're right though. I do really enjoy doing M&A work and practicing law and working with great clients and doing interesting deals. I think I really got into this in college where I was going to go in different directions. I had all kinds of different ideas of, who I wanted to be and what kind of work I wanted to do, and was a little bit, disjointed. But I was kind of stumbling around in a library late at night when I think I should have been studying for a calculus exam, and I came across a book that just jumped out at me. It was called Anatomy of a Merger by longtime Skadden Arps M&A partner, Jim Freund. And I cracked it open. It had that smell of sort of a very old library book. And it was just an incredible read. And, Jim's ability to convey, M&A technical topics in a very, plain spoken, fun, almost, I would say, a literary kind of way, really appealed to me. And so I felt like he was sort of inviting me, into his world of doing these, big deals with very interesting clients, things that were always on the Wall Street Journal and, just interesting stuff. And I thought, that's maybe what I want to do. So, I think I was maybe 18 or 19, I think, when I first did that. And so I just sort of went down the M&A path and decided to go to law school, and I guess the rest is history.
Wow, that's pretty early on, actually, to know that you wanted to do M&A. A lot of times M&A kind of sneaks up on people because it becomes a part of their existing, career. But the fact that you were sort of honed in on that is, a little unusual, actually. So I would like to hear let's talk about the spectrum of deals that you're involved in. So you've had a pretty long career, and it sounds like you've handled a variety of transactions in the M&A, world. Could you share some examples of the types and sizes of deals that you've worked on throughout your career?
It's been extremely varied. I started off doing a lot of public company work, securities work, actually, a little bit outside of the M&A area, more in the financing area. So I was doing, public company securities, some IPO work. I started kind of right before the dot-com bubble burst. And so we were doing a lot of that kind of IPO tech work and, very interesting stuff, and was doing some smaller M&A deals at the time. One of the great things about the firm I'm at is we really do a whole range of different industries, different client types. And so I've had the benefit of being able to do that because I just cannot force myself to kind of limit, particular industries or areas. I just am fascinated by, people doing interesting things. So I tend to do deals in all kinds of different areas. I probably am split about 50-50, maybe a little bit more buy-side centered, just the nature of the business. You tend to find, buyers who tend to do more repeat deals. So you may do a little bit more on the buy side. But I'd say overall, it's pretty balanced between sell side and buy side. Public company work, as well as just private company, private equity M&A. And I also do a lot of, I would say, one-off kind of bespoke structuring type of transactions, which I really enjoy. So boards that are dealing with contingent liabilities like asbestos or toxic tort, trying to find ways to structure their business, sometimes spin them off, sometimes isolate the liabilities, sell them off. So interesting transactions like that, which I really enjoy because they involve not only kind of the M&A side, but you also get a little bit of overlay with bankruptcy, with tort law, with insurance coverage, other areas. So I enjoy that, that as well. So special situations like that in addition to the, straight M&A transactions.
Right. So what can you tell us about like the biggest transaction you've ever worked on?
Biggest transaction, billions of dollars, I would say. In fact, I think I mentioned to you in 2021, I've had a lot of really busy years over my career. Even when it's a slow year, it still seems like a very busy year. When things are busy in M&A, it's just almost like an avalanche, and you have one deal after another after another. And 2020, where I thought it was going to be a very slow year, we all know now looking back, it turned out to be a very busy year. And I thought, wow, with the pandemic in sort of, full run, can't believe how many M&A deals we're doing in 2020. But 2021 was even bigger. And I found myself at the end of 2021 into 2022 with, I think, 4 or 5 active deals, couple on the sell side, I think 2 or 3 on the buy side, and probably around 6 or 7, maybe $8 billion of aggregate value, between those deals. So I've worked on the biggest public company deals that are in that kind of range to, more, I would say, typical, deals might be large middle market deals, hundreds of millions of dollars. In that range is probably a more typical size M&A deal that I see.
Yeah, we're on the integration side, so we felt the same exact thing. So 2020 and 2021 were just huge. That's why I tell my team when things are slow, enjoy it, because we're gonna get slammed again eventually. So we've been in a little bit of a slow period this last maybe 8 to 9 months. So yeah, I definitely understand it. It kind of ebbs and flows with the market. So yeah, it's good to hear that you had the busyness that we had in 2020 and 2021. We were having deals just thrown at us. A lot of times it's after close. If we're on the sell side, of course, it's pre-close. But if we're on the buy side, it's close and then bring us in and then we do our work. Yep. But it's amazing. And they were big.
That's what I loved about your work. I loved about your work because it's really focused me, I think, a little bit more on that post-closing side. Because, from our end, our finish line is closing, usually, when funds transfer and move. And then, at least in the old school days, you would have a closing dinner. People would celebrate. You don't do that as much anymore when people are kind of more remote. But you just kind of move on to another deal. I've actually found, and some of your work and your book has been helpful in that regard for me, is thinking more on the front end about how the business will integrate after, and then sort of tracking backward and saying, how can I, as an M&A lawyer, work from the agreement side or planning side, structuring side to make that more successful. So although I don't delve into that, to the same degree that you do, I think that's very important for M&A lawyers to understand the overall life cycle of a deal, and it doesn't end, when the money flows. There's a whole, really, the important part in many ways of making the M&A deal successful is actually just starting at that point.
Right. Yeah, that's actually one of my questions I was going to ask you. I am jumping ahead on my outline here, but since you brought it up, I was wondering, during the deal process, is there any discussion about the value creation or the lack thereof, or the success of that deal after close, and the things that are going to need to be done to do that, and the lift that it's going to take to do it? Does that at all impact the deal structure and like the price of the deal or anything like that? What is your view on that?
Not enough.
Not enough.
Of course, depends on the client. It depends on the lawyer. It depends on, how many deals perhaps they've done together. Buyers that are very sophisticated that tend to do a lot of programmatic type M&A where they're doing, small to middle deals, but they're doing quite a few every year in different markets, up markets, down markets, tend to be much better at that. But I think M&A is still very siloed. You'll see work streams that are accounting, finance,
Mm-hmm.
HR, legal, and it goes on and on. Whether those ever intersect, it really depends on the deal, but I find a lot of times they don't. And I even find sometimes on deals that I work on, if I try to get into things like what are really the value drivers of this deal? What could cause this, you not to get the value that you expect to get out of it? Sometimes you're met with, well, that's our CFO is working on that, or another group is working on that. Is that a legal work stream? So I think it's an educational process of really working with clients to understand that, at least from my perspective, the more information I have, not just about strictly legal, and that assumes you can even, put those into boxes. I find often not so easy to put into boxes, but even assuming you can put them into those boxes, I want to know about those other important drivers in the deal. And then that way I can think about, are there things that we can do on the structuring side or on the documentation side that will help you get to that point? Or if things go sideways, that maybe there's, a realistic way to pull back some value so that, the deal reflects what you actually got in the transaction. So yeah, I think it's a very, very important part of deals, but I think it's an area that is still not a focal point.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. So that's kind of why Intuitive Edge was created and why we do what we do. But I'm just curious, again, I'm going off my outline, but I'm curious because I've been in deals where, especially on the sell side, where there's a due diligence process, and they actually do a pretty good job of reviewing, for example, supplier contracts. That might not necessarily be something that everybody's thinking about. However, there's a lot of obligations. There's a lot of cost, obviously, involved. There's a lot of commitments that you can't get out of in those agreements. There's a lot of things that I would imagine would affect the value post-close, basically. So I've seen companies where they literally don't review any of the contracts, or there's such a small sampling that it doesn't really reflect the overall sort of value of a supply chain, or about even on the customer side also. Do you talk to your teams during the deal? Do you hear those topics come up about, well, what are the terms in the contract? What kind of limitations of liability might we have in the supplier agreements? Like, where are our risks? Did those topics come up?
Not very often. And again, it's an area that I think you're right is very, very critical to actually what delivers the value, which are the customers, the relationships, the people that are going to survive after a deal, goes forward. And so if you're not thinking about those issues, some of which are legal, a lot of which are business or cultural or human, resource related, you're not going to get the value that perhaps you price the deal at. I think on the contract review side, lawyers are still very constrained about what they look at. If you think about a public company deal that's very large, you almost may find that, there's a tendency not to look very deeply because the assumption is that no one, contract is that material. If there are a couple, of course, you'll focus on those, but the size of the deal, you tend to maybe overlook some of that. Or if you're looking at them, it tends to be very strictly legal focused. What are the assignment provisions? How does a change of control impact that? Are there particular types of contracts that, we may have to structure in some way around or to deal with? But in terms of the real meat of the contract, the substance of it, and the relationship, no, I don't think lawyers are often called upon to do that unless there's a specific reason that, that people want our input on. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. How do you think this issue could be solved to make it better? So is there a way to not be so siloed, for example? Like, how would you see that actually happening?
Yeah, I think technology may help in that regard. And I know you and I have talked about that in some ways, like advances in AI, other sorts of technologies. You're seeing people, including you, working on technological solutions for some of these, at least ways that, for example, you can have better data rooms, better dashboards, more real-time interaction with the deal team so that you can, see as one silo is doing their work stream and identifying, potential significant issues, that's available to me or to someone in the accounting function or the finance function. You don't have to wait for one of those, large diligence binders, that people still produce, but I can remember producing a lot of, that are hundreds of pages long, and even the summaries need a summary, if you remember those. So, and people often don't read those. I did a post one time where I used one as a doorstop, and, I said, I finally found a use for one of these things. And that is true in many ways. That's too little too late in a deal. So I think finding ways to, to communicate better, to use technology where you can so that people have real-time access and then can iterate solutions, rather than waiting for a weekly or bi-weekly meeting, will go a long way to helping to solve that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because my company just focuses on the contract transition piece, reviews during due diligence, and or actually creating a playbook to transition those contracts. And with that playbook comes a dashboard. And I think out of everything that our customers comment on, the biggest thing that's the biggest value to them is the dashboard, because then all of a sudden they see how many contracts there are, how many in each category, how many things are, how many things have issues, how many things are going through smoothly versus we have to deal with these issues. And we will go as far as tracking, spend data or any kind of contract data point that the customer is interested in. And it doesn't have to be just legal, right? So I think that sort of addresses what you're talking about, but it's in a very small part of the process. But what you're saying, it's almost like you're saying that if you could see that overall in the whole process, it would be helpful. So technology is definitely helpful and creates the synergy that we're looking for when we're actually closing a deal and then integrating the deal. Because closing the deal is really just an agreement. Integrating the deal is a lot more involved, right? And I find that the integration teams are thrown a lot of issues. It happens across companies, and we often get brought in at close. We often are not on the buy side, so we're often on the sell side, especially lately. And we'll get thrown in at close, and then the integration team is very overwhelmed. And I'm not just saying the integration team like an integrator. I'm talking about everybody that's touching it across all of the departments, right? Including the legal department. So it's, I'm just thinking if there's a way to address some of that stuff in the terms. I've seen terms where, I won't name names, but I'm on the sell side, and there's terms in the sales agreement that say seller has to use commercially reasonable efforts to get the procurement to a certain stage before close will happen. And so they have to go through this process. And again, that's a perfect situation for us to be brought into, because we can plan all that. We can make sure those commercially reasonable efforts are met, and we can prove that they're met, and we can document it and all those things. But it takes a lot of effort to actually do that. So how do you see that type of term in your deals?
I haven't seen that one particular one, but yes, I have seen more effort thinking around how do we sort of incentivize, an early focus on some of the key integration issues. Now, of course, lawyers always will be cautioning about antitrust and other sorts of gun jumping type things. So there's always that balancing, especially if you're doing a deal with a competitor or someone that could be a competitor, then you have to be, cautious, a little bit more cautious about that. But I do think there's also a reaction to kind of be overly conservative, in that regard. And usually my experience when I've kind of pushed a little bit on kind of the antitrust competition folks, we can find ways to, meet their issues and still do a lot on the integration front that doesn't run afoul of any gun jumping or other issues. But going to your actual question, yeah, what I've been doing more to some extent is also, you remember earnouts are still very common. In fact, more common as you've seen a kind of this delta between valuations on the sell side and on the buy side. There's always almost like a cyclical move to earnouts. But you can also structure milestone payments or other kind of contingent payments around specific integration tasks or completion modules or other things. And so I have done that where that's that's a critical part, so that it kind of incentivizes the seller to work with the buyer and achieve certain integration, whether it's IT or other contracts or other transitions. And then you have essentially incentive payments that are made as part of that process. So anything that you can do to try to align those incentives, I think certainly goes a long way. And now with the market turning in the last, as you said, 18 months or so, 2 years, a little bit more buy favorable, you've seen a little more willingness on the part of sellers to accept, those kind of provisions that you wouldn't have seen, back when we were talking 2020 or 2021. It was much more seller favorable environment. Okay,
I could go on, but I know we don't have all day, so I'm going to go to the next question here. So based on your extensive experience, we're going back to sort of a general question here. So what makes an M&A deal successful, and what factors can lead to failure in your opinion?
Well, I think that depends a little bit on who you're asking. If you're asking an M&A lawyer, then, as we talked about, success is shepherding a deal through all the different, difficulties, side roads, potential hurdles that you're going to find in every deal, whether it's big or small. That's just the nature of doing M&A deals. And for M&A lawyers, and I imagine other professionals who do M&A work, that's some of the stuff that we love. Clients don't love that. Those are problems and hurdles. But, finding creative solutions for those is part of the fun, as you said, the passion for the work. So I enjoy that. But it's really getting to a closing. But if you, of course, and from the sell side, that might be quite successful. If you get paid and you get to keep the money that you were paid, that sounds to me like a very successful M&A transaction. But if you ask the buyer, I hope what they view as a successful transaction is not only getting it closed, but then actually delivering the results that was priced into the deal. So if they believe it's going to be a value add, accretive type transaction, do you look back 18 months, 2 years, 3 years down the road and say, wow, that accomplished the goals that we had set out? Or do you look back, as far too many buyers I think do, and say, we really overpaid for that business. It's not what we expected. We have to do a write down of the value of that business. Or maybe it's not even a good fit culture-wise or otherwise for our business. So now we're going to sell it, perhaps at a loss from what you paid. And you think, wow, what all that management time, energy, effort, expenses that we incurred in that, it wasn't worth it. And for sure that is actually far too many M&A deals when you look at how many deals are actually successful in terms of meeting the goals that that they had when they started. It's a very dismal success rate.
Right. So you're saying there's more failure than success on that front.
Absolutely. But people have very short memories, and they also tend to focus more on the positive. So you don't often go back and look at that. And I wanted to mention, when I was thinking about one of the points you made earlier, we were talking about these dashboards and how to make that process better. One of the things I've also been thinking about is, not only do you want better communication, on your deals, between the different working groups, but also between different deals. So as you do M&A, as you're a buyer and you're doing acquisitions, what's working? What's not working? And how do you apply the lessons that you've learned in one deal in the other deal that you're working on? Sometimes you'll find it's just different deal teams at the same company.
Yeah.
But they don't know that, hey, we faced that issue before. We encountered a problem like that with a particular contract or with an environmental issue. We came up with some good solutions. Why don't you try these 2 or 3 things? You often don't see that. So learning the lessons from prior deals and other deals, and then having a way to access that, would be immensely important, I think, in doing deals.
Yeah, that's a good point because I've noticed that we've worked with several companies and they're in varying degrees of chaos. The ones that are not in so much chaos already have gone through it and they have a somewhat of a plan. They value our expertise because they know that we like to plan and strategize, and that's really where a lot of this success comes from, is from just kind of sitting back and actually making a plan that can be repeated. It might not be repeated exactly, but companies that have that in place are a lot better off than when they don't. And then we've been in situations where you're just thrown into chaos and there's never a solution. There's never a repeatable plan put in place. It's very chaotic. So I totally see it. Like it's just night and day. And the planning, maybe you spend some money on it at one point in time, but it's going to produce lots of value over time, many times over. Like it just is.
Yeah,
So, okay.
definitely will. It definitely will. I think
Right.
it's something that people need to focus on, especially if you're going to do, more M&As than just sort of a one-off. If you want to do
Mm-hmm.
that as part of your strategy to grow, then I think
Mm-hmm.
having that ability to access information and lessons that you might have learned on prior deals and then, get
Mm-hmm.
those into a way that is usable, I think
Mm-hmm.
is very important.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I have a kind of a final, almost final question here, and I wanted to switch gears a little bit to make this a little fun. So I noticed when I read your LinkedIn, and I am like a follower and a fan of David Edgar. So I read all your stuff, and you bring up your son all the time, and I love your son. He's cool, and I have a son too, so I relate to that. But we learn a lot from our kids, right? I mean, it's just amazing the way they see the world. And I believe that I saw something where you wrote something about that. But I wanted to ask you, what is something that he said or something that you've learned from him that is surprisingly applicable to your profession?
So many things. You're right. I think I actually did write a post, maybe for might have been National Autism Awareness Month or something last year, but I did write a post kind of on lessons that that I think I've learned from Connor. I think for me, maybe it is just to be in the present. He is extremely able to just really enjoy, despite what may be going on, in his world, each day, and really enjoys that. He's not thinking, I don't believe, about what's happening tomorrow or happened the day before, and I just am terrible at that. So that's the worst thing. I'm either really worried about something in the past, I'm thinking about a million things in the future, which I think makes you a good M&A lawyer. I'd be worried if you had an
Mm-hmm.
M&A lawyer that wasn't doing that, but it's deadly in terms of your interpersonal relationships with other people and just how you approach, the world, because you're living in a constant state of, anxiety and anticipating things and reacting to things. So I think just watching him enjoy what he's doing and, finding passion in the things that he does and enjoying each day sort of in the present is a lesson that I haven't yet learned, but I think I'm getting maybe slightly better, having him around teaching me that.
Right. It's a constant reminder.
Yeah.
Totally. I feel the same way. Just real quick, I wanted to also ask you about the mini MBA program is that something that you started or?
No, that was a firm. I can't take the credit for that. I think I was involved in the inaugural
Hmm.
program, and we still do that at K&L Gates. And I think it's a fantastic program. It brings a lot of our senior lawyers who,
Hmm.
have expertise in finance and tax and different areas of corporate law and transactional work, and really looks at the legal side, but brings that business kind of perspective. And I know other firms and companies have started doing something similar to that. But yeah, I think it's a critical component. If you don't have a good understanding about the financial drivers, the economics, the
Hmm.
accounting, tax, you're going to struggle for sure as an M&A lawyer.
Hmm.
But I think as a corporate lawyer, whatever you may be doing, it's really important, because otherwise you can go down rabbit holes and
Yeah.
never come out. So
Hmm.
having that ability to ground yourself in the business economic drivers of deals at least helps you to kind of keep your focus on what's most important, what's most material. And I think that makes deals go smoother and also helps you as a lawyer to, focus on what the clients are really valuing and looking
and what their
toward.
goals are.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like I took a MBA for lawyers. It was a 3-day class, and it was huge. I mean, I have my own business now, so I understand things even better now, but
yeah, absolutely.
being able to, ride along with the business people and understand their goals and understand where they're coming from and understand that everything is really about cash flow and money. I mean, almost every decision. So
yeah, definitely.
That's definitely good. I like that. Okay. So let's talk about where people can find you. So I know you have a podcast, you have your Talking Deals with David live.
Yep.
You have your Knowing Something M&A in a minute. Can you just tell the audience kind of where they can find you and your information?
Yeah, I think, if they go to track me down on K&L Gates website, I think there's, certainly information there and probably links to things that I've written or other, interviews, other things that I've done. But you're right. Definitely for the last, I guess, 2022, I got on LinkedIn for the first time, the end of 2022. Since then, I post pretty regularly. And as you mentioned, you were a great guest on one of my live stream Talking Deals with David. So I write there and also do those podcasts as well. So people can check me out and follow there if they want.
And don't forget, you're a poet also.
I do some poetry, usually M&A related, but I do. Yeah, I do. I will throw in some rhyme occasionally. And I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but one of the best things that came out of LinkedIn was someone who's a great, also contributes on LinkedIn, but he actually, without me asking, took one of my poems, I think it was a one about the seller's perspective on a deal, and actually put it down on a track and rapped it.
Oh.
So and then sent it to me, and that was a lot of fun. I haven't posted that, but
awesome.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. So yeah, so sometimes when you do those things on LinkedIn and you try some creativity, that was something, challenging for me, I think, to just be willing to try different things, whether it's video or, occasionally writing some poetry, especially when you're at a larger firm. You tend to, try to stay color within the lines, I guess, with your crayon. But no, I think people enjoy that. I enjoy that sort of creative outlet. And I think fundamentally M&A is about creativity and about finding new ways to solve problems. And so I think if you can, stimulate your thinking with art or music or, occasional M&A inspired poetry, that can only help you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your perspective on that. I love it. Makes it more exciting for us in this industry.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insights and experiences with us today. It's been enlightening to hear about the multifaceted world of M&A through your lens. For our listeners wanting to learn more about David or connect with him, don't forget you can find him on LinkedIn and follow his M&A in a Minute series for tips on deal making. Thank you everyone for tuning in to M&A Plus, the art after the deal. Join us next time as we continue to explore the complex and fascinating world of mergers and acquisitions. Bye for now.